Hello. It has been a minute since I last recorded a podcast episode, and for that, I am so sorry. But welcome back to the Good Girls Formula and F1 podcast. I'm your host, Zoe. Today we're going to be recapping the British Grand Prix. Better late than never is just all I have to say about it. And I could not go through and skip talking about the British Grand Prix. It is one of my absolute favorite races of the whole year. I have been to Silverstone a couple of times, and I was actually in England while the race was going on this year, and I was very sad not to actually be at the Grand Prix, but we're going to be recapping it all. It was a very exciting race. Just a quick little personal recap. As I mentioned, I know it's been a minute. I have been here, there, and everywhere the past month, basically just flying back and forth to England for various things. For those of you who don't know, I'm actually from England, but I live in the US. So we've been doing a lot of back and forth this summer. Family holidays, family events going on, so that's definitely kept me very busy, and unfortunately this kind of got a little bit out of hand because work has also been a little bit crazy for me recently. Sorry about that, and I've missed you guys. I did actually film a recap of the Canadian Grand Prix, which I realized is a while ago, but that should be coming out within the next few days. I'm just gonna upload it anyway because I filmed it and it could be interesting to watch, but yeah. So that'll come after this. I recorded that 3 weeks ago, before the Austrian Grand Prix or anything like that. So anyway, that's what's going on. That's what to expect. Hopefully we are back to normal from here on out. We have to start by talking about some of the news that has come through the Formula One world in the past couple of weeks. Really, just most recently, the fact that Christian Horner has been dismissed as the team principal at Red Bull, which is actually, I don't want to say unexpected, because I feel like there have just been so many rumors about this for such a long time that seeing that it actually happened didn't necessarily come as a shock to me, but I thought that the timing was pretty shocking. It seemed like a very odd time to be announcing that, to have that happen. They're midway through the season at this point. Why not just let him finish the season? I've been trying to look into some of the reasons why he was let go so suddenly, and I've seen a few different things. I'm not entirely sure on the validity of some of the things that I saw. Something that I saw said that some of his main backers lost a majority stake in the company, and the people who now have the majority stake aren't a huge fan, and so a slight incident caused him to get dismissed. I've seen some other things just saying that it's all, well, Red Bull hasn't really been performing up to par this season, so they decided that it was time. So I've seen a few different things. I'm not sure of the actuality of any of them, but those are some of the rumors that have been circulating. My brother, actually, this was so funny. My brother was literally like, oh, maybe he got fired because there was a clause in his contract that said when Hülkenberg got a podium, he gets to be fired. Because we're obviously going to be talking about Hülkenberg's podium today. Anyway, that kind of triggered a restructuring for both the Red Bull team and the Racing Bulls team. So the Racing Bulls team director is being moved up to Red Bull to take over, and that's pretty interesting. And I think it also leaves a lot of questions open about Max Verstappen. I think we're all waiting for an announcement at this point that he is going to go to Mercedes. I don't know what to expect. I don't want him to, because I really like Russell and Antonelli. I think they make a great team. I would feel so bad for Russell if he got kicked out at this point. It's a little bit just the timing of the season. I just feel like it's all so difficult, and I just don't see a world where it would make sense to ruin the dynamic that they have. I don't know. It's hard to say. I think Russell's a great driver, but Verstappen is definitely better. So hard to say. So I'm really unsure where Horner's leaving is going to leave Max, whether it was something that he wanted, something that he didn't want. I'm very curious about that. Additionally, the F1 movie is officially out. Like I said, I've been traveling a whole bunch and I haven't seen it yet, but I'm hoping to go within the next couple of weeks. So fingers crossed. And if you have been, then let me know your thoughts, because I'm very curious. I feel like it's a very mixed bag of people who have enjoyed it and maybe haven't enjoyed it quite so much. Also, a little side note, but the McLaren livery for the British Grand Prix was so good. I loved it. I thought it was so cool. I love the nod back to what I kind of remember as the OG in my head of like whenever I first started watching Formula One a little bit more seriously was when Jenson Button and Lewis Hamilton were both racing at McLaren Mercedes, and it was that kind of color. It was like the silver, traditional, like the kind of bright orange, but not orange, but it was more of like a coral at the time, I think it was. Either way, the silver on them was a nod back to that, and I loved it. Okay, let's hop into the recap. I'm not going to talk much about the free practice sessions because honestly I didn't watch them. Like I said, I was literally just in a traveling mindset. Sometimes you miss things. Anyway, super fun race, very exciting. The qualifying was also pretty exciting. So let's start with Q1. So pretty early into Q1, Colapinto went out in the gravel and hit the wall. Hamilton also cut it a little bit close. I was like, is he going to make it through Q1? Because he gives me that little panic attack every single time I feel like I watch qualifying. I'm always like, dude, could we whip out a few quicker laps earlier on? Like, come on. Please, just like for my stress levels, I would really appreciate that. Knocked out in Q1, we had Lawson, Bortoleto, Stroll, Hülkenberg, and Colapinto. In Q2, we had Piastri and Verstappen actually set the exact same lap time, which is always so crazy. I mean, that doesn't happen very often, obviously. But they're so close together, and they're in completely different cars, and it's just so cool. So they both set a 1:25.316 second lap. Alonso also got a little bit annoyed during Q2 with Antonelli, who he was moving a little bit slowly at one point. And also just a little reminder, Antonelli already has a 3-place grid penalty due to his incident in Austria with Verstappen, so this was definitely a weekend when he would want to qualify really, really well. Knocked out in Q2 was Sainz, Tsunoda, Hadjar, Albon, and Ocon. It was sad to see both of the Williams out. I feel like recently they haven't been performing as well as they were at the beginning of the season, so I hope that they can come back from this and start making their way up there again. During Q3, there was a pretty exciting battle. Hamilton actually split the McLarens at one point. It was like, ooh, who's it going to be? Russell actually pulled out some pretty incredible laps. There was a slight mistake from Piastri on his final flying lap, so he didn't beat his original lap time, and Verstappen always sits there in qualifying, sits there in the race, and he's like, this car sucks, I don't like this, you need to fix this. He's complaining constantly, and then he pulls out a crazy fast lap and winds up on pole, and the next second he's like, woohoo, and I'm like, dude, you're giving me whiplash, like, which one is it? So in the end, qualifying, we had Max Verstappen on pole, Oscar Piastri second, Lando Norris, George Russell, Lewis Hamilton, Charles Leclerc, Kimi Antonelli, Oliver Behrman, Fernando Alonso, and Pierre Gasly as our top 10. Moving on to the race. This was actually such a good race. I love a rainy race. I think it just brings so much more excitement, so much more drama to the track. So like I said, I didn't actually watch the race live. I texted my dad and he was like, oh, this was a classic. You absolutely have to watch that. And I agree. I thought that it was just classic, amazing, good, exciting Formula One racing. And there are just so many different things that we can talk about today. We'll talk about Piastri and his whole drama queen moment, all of the many spins due to the weather, and of course the star of the day, Nico Hülkenberg. So just a few adjustments from the starting lineup from qualifying. So Antonelli, as I mentioned, he had a grid penalty, so he actually wound up starting in 10th. Behrman also took a 10th-place grid penalty due to a red flag infringement in FP3. I feel like this is not his first rodeo with a red flag infringement. Should probably start watching those red flags a little bit more closely. And then Colapinto also decided to start from the pit lane. Now, the weather in this race definitely kept it very crazy, kept everybody on their toes. And before the race started, most people had on the intermediate tires. But as they went out on the formation lap, which was behind the safety car, a few people went in and actually put on slicks, which I thought was a very interesting choice. Hindsight is 2020, right? Like if it had dried up and they had already been on those slicks, like it probably would have been genius. They would have been front of the pack. They would have been doing amazing. Unfortunately, that was not the way that it rounded up. So a couple of the people I know that did that were like Leclerc, Russell, both of them went in and changed to the slicks. And it just didn't really work out for them in the end, unfortunately. We did have a pretty exciting race from lap 1. So pretty early on, Lawson had a collision with Ocon, and he went out, which brought out the virtual safety car, and Colapinto also stalled in the pit lane and had to retire. Before the VSC ended, Bortoleto had a bit of a spin. He was able to go a little bit after that, but he also eventually wound up stopping and retiring. He had a little bit of debris on the track as well, so there was another safety car called out for that. As we know, Verstappen started on pole, but Piastri was eventually able to take the lead away from him. And pretty soon, he had a pretty good gap going. He had that race in control. However, the rain came down and it was heavy, so people had to make pit stops and the safety car was deployed. McLaren actually double stacked Piastri and Norris. A little bit of a slower pit stop than they were probably hoping for. Poor Leclerc was complaining because he had water stuck in his visor, which it always blows my mind, and we're actually going to be talking about this a little bit more in the technical tidbits, is just the way that the F1 cars have to be adapted to the rain, because obviously they perform best in nice, clean, dry air. So when you add water into the mix, it really is a whole nother element. Anyway, we'll get into that. But Leclerc, poor guy, must have gotten water in his eyes and couldn't see, and it was actually kind of crazy just to watch the rain coming down and knowing that they just have this visor on. I remember whenever I was younger and I was watching Formula One, I would always be like, oh, they should have like windscreen wipers on their visor. I don't know how easy that would be to implement, but maybe they should. Once it got going again, Hadjar actually ran into the back of Kimi Antonelli. He had a pretty intense crash after that. I was very glad to see that he was all okay. Antonelli was able to keep going for a few laps, but he did eventually retire. That whole incident did bring out the safety car again. Unfortunately, the gap that Piastri had gained by that point was gone. And this was actually a very interesting moment in the race as well, which is his little... I wouldn't call this moment actually his drama queen moment, but this was the moment that caused a little bit of drama, because as the safety car was coming in, he apparently slammed on his brakes pretty hard, and it caused Verstappen to almost run into the back of him. He had to swerve and go almost past him. And then they were talking about it later, and they were saying that even all the way at the back of the grid there were implications from that, of people having to suddenly stomp on their brakes. I believe I read that it was 100 miles an hour or something that he went from, he slowed down by 100 miles an hour, which is actually kind of crazy. It didn't look that bad other than the fact that Verstappen almost ran into the back of him, but overall I feel that does usually happen. The leader does slow down. But he did eventually get a 10-second penalty for this, which he was incredibly angry about. And I do feel that was a pretty intense punishment for that. I feel we see that kind of thing relatively often, and I think in Piastri's mind, he was I didn't do anything wrong, I was following the rules, whatever. I do wonder how much of it was impacted by the fact that it was so rainy out, by the conditions that were there in general. And I have to remember, what you can see on the screen is very different than what they are experiencing in real time. They have great reaction times, all of them, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they should have to stop by 100 miles an hour or slow down by 100 miles an hour. And I can only imagine if somebody did that right in front of me, how intense that would be. And again, it's that's not quite as much as it normally is, so I understand a little bit where the stewards were coming from, but it did seem quite an intense punishment, and we'll talk about that a little bit more as we go on. Verstappen actually had a little spin on that restart. I don't think it was necessarily caused by Piastri's little slowdown moment, but you could make a claim that he was kind of thrown off by that experience, and so when they restarted, he wasn't in the right mindset and able to adapt quickly enough. I feel that's kind of a lame excuse, but it happens. It was wet, and it's hard work to race in that rain, so I'll give him the benefit of the doubt. Towards the end of the race, there was exciting moments between Hülkenberg, Stroll, and Hamilton. Hulk was catching up to Stroll for a really long time, so yeah, Stroll was in the top 3 for a while. Kind of crazy. They were both fighting for that podium. Anyway, Hulk was able to eventually catch up to Stroll, get past him. Hamilton followed as well, and a few more laps, and I think that Hamilton would have gotten Hülkenberg by the end of the race, but he just didn't quite have enough time, which was so exciting for Hülkenberg. This was Hülkenberg's first podium. I believe it was 293 3 race starts, which is the record of most race starts without having a podium. So this was such a well-earned podium from Nico Hülkenberg. I am so sad that I haven't actually uploaded my Canadian Grand Prix recap, because I had a whole section in that, and you can go and watch it if you would like to, but I had a whole section in that where I ranted about the fact that Nico Hülkenberg deserves a podium, and now he has one. And I was like, yes, 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 yes. While that was all going on, Piastri wanted his race back. I think that he was in a lot of control of the race in the beginning. He was really mad about that 10-second penalty that he got, and he was bold enough to ask the team if they could like swap positions and then race it out, which I was like, dude, like, that is a very bold ask when your teammate is in front of you and is winning his home Grand Prix, and you got penalized for something that you did. Like, I was just shocked. I was shocked. I didn't expect that from Piastri. I know in the moment there's a lot of emotion and things. He was angry after the race too. I don't even think he really wanted to talk to anybody about it, which fair. But we're just not used to seeing that from Piastri. He's usually just so calm and cool and collected. So it was a little bit odd to see him in such a strop. Like, wow. Anyway, very exciting though. Norris was able to win his home Grand Prix, and he was so happy about it. It was so fun to see his reaction. I feel like it just adds so much extra pizzazz whenever somebody wins their home Grand Prix, especially when it's their first time winning their home Grand Prix. So very, very excited for Norris. I think that it was a good win on his part. He did everything right, and he was able to stay up there, and yeah. So I think he definitely deserved it. It also adds to a lot of excitement when it comes to the championship battles. So right now we still have Piastri at the top in number 1. He has 234 points, but Norris is close behind, 8 points behind, 226 points. With 165 we have Verstappen, and then 147 for Russell and 119 for Leclerc. So that's our top 5 in the Drivers' Championship. Okay, so now we're going to move on to talk about our technical tidbit for the week. And as I mentioned, we're going to be talking a little bit about how the car can be adapted for rainy races. And I just thought this would be really interesting because you don't really think about it that much. Like, I know we all know about the tire situation probably, where for whenever it's raining, they're going to be changing their tire composition. So they'll put on the intermediates or the wet tires depending on how wet it is. Usually they go for inters. It has to be really wet. I feel like it's been for them to put on the wets. But those tires have basically tread patterns in them to help kind of smush the water. I don't know a better way to say it. Essentially drive the water under the tires while still allowing them to have better traction than they would with the slick tires, because the slick tires have a smooth surface along them, and so there's nowhere for the water to go, and there's a lot higher chance of aquaplaning. But I also thought it'd be interesting to talk about some of the other adjustments that they can make to the car to maximize it in the rainy race situation. So the first thing that they do is they tend to have the car a little bit higher up. So normally, in order to maximize your aerodynamic efficiencies and all of that kind of stuff, you want the car to be as low as possible. But when it's raining, you want to raise that ride height a little bit in order to improve visibility and also help to prevent aquaplaning. Another thing that they'll do a little bit differently is they'll change the camber, so they'll have a little bit of a softer suspension setup, and so the camber, the inclination of the wheels as well, will be slightly less than how they would be in a normal condition, because as you're going on a racetrack in the rain, you're not going to be pushing at quite the same kinds of cornering speeds that you typically would in a normal race, and so the lateral acceleration that's occurring is going to be a lot less, so you don't need as much camber, and having less camber on the straights mean that you get a lot more traction as well, because they're able to be a little bit more vertical whenever you are going straight. And so that just helps to make sure that you have as much traction as possible and to prevent spinning. Now, I mentioned the type of tires, but you also have to consider the tire pressure that's going to make the most sense for a race. And you have to think about a whole bunch of different things. But one of the ones that I thought was really interesting whenever I was reading about it is that you really have to consider the asphalt composition. So depending on where you are, the actual roadway itself is going to be made of different materials that may have different drainage capacity. So let's say that the asphalt is wet, but it is no longer raining. If that drainage capacity is low, then you're probably going to want to have higher pressure on the tires, whereas if that drainage capacity is high, then you're going to want a lower pressure in order to get to the point where you're going to get those tires to the temperature window that you want, because temperature and pressure are always going to be linked, and it's the relationship between those two that helps to determine just how quickly these tires are going to get to the ideal temperature and stay there. That's a little bit of a quicker technical tidbit for today, but I hope that you found that interesting. We're going to hop now into the last part of the episode where we're going to do a little preview for the next race. So the next race is the Belgian Grand Prix at Spa, which is always such a fun track, and it's another track that is likely to have some unpredictable weather. So I honestly, if we get another rainy race, I would be so excited. So the track was originally built in 1921. It was used public roads throughout the region, and it was a whopping 14.9 kilometers. It was redeveloped in 1979, and while it's only 7 kilometers now, it is still the longest track on the calendar. It was also part of Formula One's inaugural season in 1950, and that year the race was won by the legend Fangio. The weather in Spa, as I mentioned, can often be pretty unpredictable, so we'll see what happens. But in 2021, actually, in fact, they didn't even manage to have any racing laps. They had a couple of laps out on the safety car. It caused a whole bunch of controversy, if anybody remembers that. Kind of wild to see just how much of an effect the rain can have. There was also another Grand Prix at Spa back in 1998 where there was a massive 13-car pileup on the first lap. It caused a red flag. They had to do a whole restart, all of that kind of thing. But there are multiple instances of the rain causing a lot of chaos at this Grand Prix. So we'll see how it goes this weekend. But my prediction for the weekend is I think that Lewis Hamilton is going to get a podium. It's time. It's time. And I am still a big Lewis Hamilton fan at heart. So I'm hoping the best for him. Let me know your predictions for next week down in the comments below, or message me on Instagram at Great Girls Formula. I'm so happy to be back, get back into the swing of things. And yeah, let me know if there's any other technical tidbits that you want me to talk about in the future. And I will talk to you guys in the next episode. Bye.